This is Juwan Buford, broadcasting from Detroit metropolitan area. And, the first thing I want to do is I want to offer condolences to Dr. Ralph Story, or as I always referred to him. I never referred to him as Ralph. For me, it was always Dr. Story. And I want to offer condolences to his family. I want to offer condolences to his beautiful daughter, Miss Kayla Dia Story. And, I felt compelled to share this story for so many different reasons. Number one, because he made such an incredible impact in my life, because I know the impact he made in others, and because he was such a rare and special person. And so often individuals come and leave this earth not having received the flowers they deserve while they're in life, but even sometimes in death. And for me, I just couldn't sit still. I couldn't be still. I couldn't be okay without recognizing the contributions that Dr. Story made to my life personally, but also others around me. And I literally remember my first introduction to Dr. Story. I was attending his argumentative writing class in CSP, the Comprehensive Studies program, kind of like an entry program into University of Michigan. And I remember sitting in class, and I remember my first impressions of him. I had never, ever experienced an African-American man in academia or outside of it that was so, I want to say, multi-dexterous. I just remember his seriousness. Day one, you would get like this whole, I wouldn't call it a cacophony, organized noises, guess what I would call it, of just seriousness and empathy. And he could be so joyous and comical, poetic and passionate. And of course, a little bit of ratchet, right? From time to time. And I remember thinking to myself, whoa, like, what is this? My prototype or my example of what it meant to be an African-American man growing up in the city of Detroit was so myopic and so, in many respects, opaque. It didn't have much feeling, if you will. There wasn't a lot of bright colors. And if there was anything that anyone would fully acknowledge about Dr. Story, is he was full of color and full of life. And it was so invaluable to see that, to see someone in academia and outside of it that was just so layered and had so much personality, that was so expressive, but also contemplative. All these different layers to his personality was just, to me, it was something to marvel at. And right then and there, I knew I had to develop a relationship with this individual. And that's exactly what transpired. Being in his class was like the first time that I felt like there was a space where I could really exhibit the layers to my personality, the intellect, the passion, the love of music, art, literature in particular. I felt safe in his classroom, right? There was no judgment. There was criticism. There was plenty of criticism, but there was no judgment. And, it translated outside the classroom. Like, to this day, I'm just so shocked in terms of how open he could be, how supportive Dr. Story could be. I remember, because, U of M was not overtly hostile most of the time, but it was a type of environment that I felt like I never really felt safe there. I wasn't a frat boy. So I wasn't inclined to join groups for the sake of popularity or just to be a part of something. I wasn't searching for that. I developed this reputation as a GDI. He helped give me that reputation. Goddamn independent. And so, I wasn't going to gravitate towards that environment. For me, it was my experience at University of Michigan majority of the time. And quite frankly, even today, as I've progressed professionally, and as an entrepreneur in the different environments I roll in, you're oftentimes wearing a mask. It reminds me of a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar. We wear the mask. And when I was around him, when I was in his office, in his like barbershop, almost like environment that he created, I could take down the mask, and it became fertile ground for any and everything. I mean, I'd walk into his office, see any number of colorful personalities in there, and we could be talking about poetry, relationships, tactics in terms of writing and winning arguments. I remember repeatedly, like, you cannot make straw man arguments. Do not do that, right? That was one of the first lessons I learned in argument writing. And he would always, I had this tendency to kind of take flight and branch off into other things in the midst of a discussion. He's like, nah, that's not effective, right? So he had this really sharp intellect, right? Very good listener. But you could talk about politics, identity, activism, culture, books. I mean, you just didn't have to be locked in some type of box, right? Some stereotypical concept of what it meant to be an African American male that went out the door. You could be covering any subject at any given time. I mean, there were moments of hilarity, seriousness, passion, but it was like fertile ground for myself and so many others, right? To have the free space of expression and know that it was a safe place. I mean, I can't even articulate how invaluable that experience was. I just remember, once again, just all this confluences of experiences and conversation and feelings and ways of expression that he allowed to transpire. And in some respects, oftentimes he was orchestrating it with great satisfaction and glee. Sometimes he was responding to it. Sometimes he was criticizing or critiquing, but it was just always love. It was always love. And once again, he could be empathetic, critical, and challenging. Some of my favorite phrases that I use to this day came from him, convenient amnesia and feigned ignorance. We talked about that all the time. That was not tolerable, by the way. It was not tolerable in his office. He introduced the concept of dissonance, right? Dissonance. He would talk about that as it relates to Duke Ellington. And he actually, I appreciated jazz, but he really turned me on to the jazz, the culture, the expression, the depth of it. I mean, he was just such an incredible creative in his own right. He provided a space for me to beta test ideals. And also, quite frankly, he could be a cudgel against some really dumb Apple decisions. I made plenty of them. And thankfully, he was there oftentimes to kind of chin check me to make sure that I did not follow through on some of those dumb decisions and suffer some pretty bad consequences. It's just part of that youthful experience, right? Growing up in your 20s and being a man. I remember a particular situation that transpired. It was a sit down. Ended up having a serious impact on the university environment, along with a lot of activist endeavors I was involved in. I mean, man, now that I reflect on it, he led me to so many people. He was so much more aware and politically astute than I think people gave him credit for or even realized. Because despite the passion and laughter and joy, and I shouldn't say despite, in the midst of the passion, laughter, and joy, he had a very critical, smart, and sharp mind. And I remember as an activist on that campus, like the way he would encourage me to talk to certain people, not simply because he thought they would be friendly to me, but because he knew they would challenge me. And that was invaluable because I would not have sought out those individuals. I would not have sought out those relationships had it not been under his direction. And as I reflect on it, it's just fascinating the extent to which I was shaped, or the extent to which he gave me the freedom to shape myself and others. And as a result, how I was able to find expression intellectually, culturally, socially, politically, and otherwise on that campus. And, I'm not going to say that I would not have been able to matriculate successfully through the University of Michigan and through life, absent. But he allowed me to develop so much depth that it became a more worthwhile experience. And I know my life is more worthwhile because of having known him. And I remember when we fell on opposite sides of the fence, I remember how critical he was of me in some of the activist endeavors I was involved in, particularly the sit-in. It was like a SCC sit-in, Students of Color Coalition sit-in. And, when you're an activist and when you're young, you have this ideal that you want to be right? So important to be right. And he opened my eyes to how important it is also to be effective and to be able. And he pointed out areas of responsibility and things where I may have not been exercising enough forethought in terms of how my behaviors not only impacted that current circumstance, but the lives of other people around him. And he also put a set of expectations on me that despite my active efforts, there was a certain expectation of performance, right? To succeed and to level up and become bigger, to become something more. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. He made U of M tolerable. He made U of M memorable, joyous, and experiential. And that experiential piece can't be understated. It just can't be understated. The depth, the richness, they say time is what life is made of. He taught me that you can go through time, not grow, not love, not really be living. Experiences is what life is made of. And he taught me how to be present. And my life is richer for him. Now, I'll forever be indebted to him, forever be appreciative of him for providing me with the space and the freedom and the responsibility, and to understand that I had the freedom and the power to curate my self-concept and curate the person I could become, and to be more courageous in terms of the different sides and aspects of personality and life, and to just see it in its totality. Oftentimes in life, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. And the joys and experiences I've had since interacting with Dr. Stewart on a regular basis, I know he helped fashion the person I am, which has made me a richer person and the people around me richer, hopefully, majority of them, for me having been here on this earth. So I'm thankful. I'm appreciative. The story, of course, you and I think we may have interacted a total of one time. But I can tell you, he spoke so glowingly of you. He was so proud of you. He lit up like a Christmas tree when he talked about you. And he was certainly a gift. And I know from knowing him that you are a gift. And you have so much to give the world. And I know you're gonna continue to embody the beauty that was Dr. Story.